We're back on Upstream talking with Matthew Lee Anderson about Oliver O'Donovan's short but powerful treatise on bioethics and human nature, Begotten or Made, and its implications for our time. Matt, I wonder how our insistence on unfettered freedom leaves us. O'Donovan makes this argument that it actually paradoxically leaves us less free when all we seek is the sort of freedom to express our wills and impress them upon creation, including ourselves. He even talks about how, we want our cities to look a certain way, so we take all the birds out of the air and take all the weeds out of the ground, and we apply that same logic to ourselves, that we could just control our bodies the same way. But it doesn't work. It leaves us less free because our bodies actually limit us. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then what it means for in the context of bioethics and specifically reproduction?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating argument, and I'm tempted to just leave it there, Shane, and just say you did a great job of instilling it. That's kind of what it means, actually, that we are less free. But I do think, when O'Donovan talks about the impetus or the impulse to control ourselves, at one point he has a line about how that we sort of reach the limits of our control over nature at our own body. Like, we encounter nature as much as we can try to escape it. We have our own bodies. We're alone with ourselves. And there's a sense in which, at some level, we have to come to terms with our flesh. No man ever hates his own flesh, Paul writes in Ephesians, right? And there's a question about what that means in this sort of context. Obviously in this book, Oliver has a chapter on sex by artifice and the attempt to reconfigure our flesh in accordance with either a kind of social conception of what we would want, or according to some psychological conception. He distinguishes between these two ways of understanding what people are trying to do when they are wrestling with gender dysphoria, as we would call it, and as I think he calls it. But there's a sense in which even those projects that attempt to reconfigure our bodies has a real limit, that there's still something intrinsic about fleshliness, about our bodies, that we cannot escape. And this is a moment where I think actually I would want Oliver to talk more about the gospel and to not appeal quite so much to the nature of our flesh that we can't escape, and instead talk more about the resurrection of the body. And to say, in that confrontation with the body, in that confrontation with the flesh, what we encounter, what we experience is itself inherently marked by sin and death, that it is ordered by that. And that's not good news, right? That the encounter with my body just on its own is not good news. And that the only way in which that becomes good news is through hearing the gospel that Christ died and rose again, and that the body is the sort of thing that will be raised with Christ. And so that even in my encounter with nature, it's going to be, in its most stark form, still broken, still alienated, still distanced from myself. And that the only good news that we're going to have in that context is the resurrection. I think Oliver agrees with that, obviously, but he doesn't make use of that in this book in quite the way in which I want him to. And I think that's a limitation.
So that's very fascinating to me, because I haven't read the resurrection book that he did, not yet, but it seems to me that we could draw a distinction, tell me what you think, between aspects of our embodied existence that are just good givens that we actually do have to conform ourselves to and learn to appreciate and receive with gratitude, because that's just what we are as embodied beings. Like, I think of a book like Kelly Kapick's You're Only Human, right? I had him on a while back to talk about that. And it's sort of like an apology for just make your peace with creation, because you are an embodied creature. You're going to eat. You're going to sleep. You're going to, be in one place and not other places. And that's just what it is to be human. And you should be happy about that, right? Versus stuff like, well, death being the, preeminent example, and the suffering and infertility and things like that. I mean, these are supposed to be intrusions into our embodied existence that you would look to resurrection as a, ultimate solution for. How do we draw the distinction there? Because it seems like if I look on one hand, at the I guess the naturalist, the old style naturalist argument, you might want to say, well, it's all just the way it always has been, right? This is just evolution. Get used to it, kid. And on the other hand, you've got this sort of transhumanist, the more recent transhumanist vision, which is like, oh no, death itself is negotiable. All of this stuff is just, the body is disgusting. We hate it. We want to be free from it and become a computer people. How do you like walk down the middle of that, or diagonalize it, or whatever way you want to say that?